It's the Jersey Blitz, NJ.com's high school football podcast. Hi, Jersey sports fans. I'm Dan Long, and on today's episode, I'll be joined by NJ.com football beat writers Ryan Patty, Donovan Hugel, Kevin Minnick, Mike Kinney, and Joe Zadalis. And on today's episode, we'll recap Washington Township's thrilling comeback victory, as well as take a look at some of the big results from South Jersey. We'll also look at some of the thrilling top 20 games of the Super Football Conference and have a preview of the 2025 NJIC Championship from North Jersey. We'll talk about West Orange rivalry win over East Orange and get you caught up on everything that's going on in the Shore Conference. Each of our writers will give us one takeaway a week before the public school playoffs begin, while also giving us an impact player who can lift their teams at this point in the season. And we'll finally preview some of Week 8's biggest games, including a breakdown of number 3 St. Joe's traveling to Oradell to take on number 2 Bergen Catholic. So, starting things off, I want to welcome Kevin Minnick onto the Jersey Blitz. And Kevin, Washington Township might have produced the game of the year in South Jersey with their thrilling comeback victory last weekend.
Yeah, Dan, going into that game against Kingsway, two teams ranked in our top 20, didn't think it was going to be a blowout by any stretch, but we knew Kingsway was no pushover, and the week before, Township kind of took care of business against an RV team that was a little bit injured still. So maybe this Kingsway game held even more significance than the RV game did. And the Minutemen were down 12 points. 6 minutes left in the game, and I don't know if you're thinking upset right here or not, but they find a way to come back and to win that game, getting a touchdown by Jair Moore, in the final minute and change to erase that 12-point deficit. Clearly, I think, yes, the game of the year in South Jersey, in the West Jersey Football League right now, and one that really shows, I think, just how good Washington Township is. That you can get behind a team that is very good, but you find ways to get the job done, and they did just that. And senior quarterback Cole Aquino, he does a real nice job of getting the ball to everybody, spreading it around, and down the stretch, he hits Jair Moore, who turns something into, really turned nothing, I guess you could put it that way, into something, and gets them the touchdown. A kid who really had a devastating knee injury last year. Basically, doctors had said at this particular location that is the worst they had seen of an MCL tear, an ACL tear. But this kid worked his butt off, got back in 8 months, and here he is to have a moment like that. So, yes, clearly the game of the year right now, and obviously something that Washington Township will look at to continue to build some momentum as they, take this undefeated record into this week.
Kevin, do you feel at this point that Washington Township should be regarded as the team to beat in Group 5? Based on how everything's been going and a kind of a reloading year of sorts for Toms River North, is Washington Township, based on what you've seen from them and their resilience here, as well as their dominance in other wins, are they the team to beat in Group 5 in your mind?
I kind of think they are. Obviously I haven't seen the teams in the North, but from what I've seen in the last couple of years, I put this Township team right up there with a lot of them. I don't know if they're as good as the Toms River North teams of the recent past, but they have taken a step up the ladder in each successive year. And, I hadn't seen Washington Township in person up until 2 weeks ago. I came away extremely impressed against RV. Everything that I had read, everything that I've heard, when you look at stats and kind of put it all together, I thought, this team's really good. And I think, they maybe need to be tested just a little bit more. And obviously last week with Kingsway was a test. Kingsway is a team under Mark Hendricks, who's been to sectional finals or sectional semifinal every year for the past 4 or 5 years. So, we knew how good Kingsway was, and Township found a way to win the game. So, sometimes, you win great. Sometimes you win ugly. Sometimes it doesn't matter how you win. At the end of the day, it was a W. So yeah, I really, really have been impressed with them. And right now, I don't know who beats them.
In another result in South Jersey, a thing that could affect seeding in the non-public A ranks. St. Augustine rallying to a victory. How do you see the Hermits shaping up as the season has progressed? I know that they've been fighting through injuries through a big portion of their season, but they rallied for a big victory this time around.
Yeah, they've been hit by the injury bug more this year than I think they have in the past. But they did get a couple of kids back in the last week or so. Roman Coney is back, their top running back. He returned last week. They got back, I believe it's Liam Quinn. One of their top receivers finally got into a game. So they're starting to get healthy, and this is a great time of year for that to happen. They're down 14 points after the first quarter to RV at home. At that point, you're kind of following along a little bit and you're thinking, oh, well, maybe RV's kind of turned the corner. Savian Adams might be back and things are looking, up for them. And St. Augustine cuts the deficit in half going into halftime, and then, pours it on in the second half with 21 straight points, 28 altogether unanswered, and to win the game by 2 touchdowns. St. Augustine, in all honesty, a lot of people look at that team over the years, and they've been a run-dominated team, and the quarterback hasn't had to do a whole lot, and continues to maybe, isn't asked to do, save a game, or isn't asked to do a whole lot, because they do rely on the run game so much. But Ryan Storer has done a pretty decent job this year, and I think they're becoming, not that they are extremely balanced, past the run, but the passing game is starting to get there a little bit more. He threw for 118 yards and a touchdown last week. 8 of 12 is pretty efficient, especially when you have a solid running game like they do. So I think, if the quarterback position continues to play well, maybe even quote unquote a little bit above average, St. Augustine could do some damage. And, I don't know that they are good enough to contend with the Boscos and the Bergens and the St. Joe's Montvales of the world. But, I think that they can be competitive. So, this win over RV at home, coming back the way they did, showed me a little bit. And, they've got Millville on the road this week. We'll see what happens. Millville's another team that's been injured an awful lot this year, and it's clearly not the same Millville as we've seen in the past. But St. Augustine goes on the road and wins this game, and then goes into Holy Spirit the week before the non-pub playoffs begin, and turn in another solid game. They'll have some serious momentum, and who knows what may happen. They are underestimated quite often, and maybe this is the year that they kind of break through a little bit more.
So now shifting gears back up north, we're going to be taking a look at a top 5 matchup from last week in the Super Football Conference. We bring on Ryan Patty and Donovan Hugel. And Ryan, you had DePaul Catholic, who were thumped by Don Bosco Prep. And people were kind of thinking maybe they don't have the horses that they've had this year compared to last season's. Well, they still find a way to get into the end zone with Nick Campanelli's offense, and they did it over and over against a previously undefeated St. Peter's Prep squad that was starting to play better defense. The Marauders have had a tough time over the last couple of years of trying to slow down the Spartans, and now DePaul hands St. Peter's their first loss of the season. What did you take from that top 5 showdown?
Yeah, this is the third time in a row DePaul has beaten St. Peter's, Dan, and this was a win they needed in the worst way. They had just got beat up by Don Bosco, almost had a running clock put on them, and they responded with a win that, to me, should instill a lot of confidence in them, from a lot of people, that they're still the team to beat in non-public B. And Derek Zammit made a lot of plays with his legs, but it wasn't his best game of the year through the air. They kind of leaned on the run, but it was the defense here. You mentioned the offense moving the ball. The defense and special teams made some big plays for DePaul in this game, Dan. And you had a kick return for a touchdown from A.J. Larkin. You had 2 fumble recoveries on defense, including a scoop and score from Jackson Bastante, the senior linebacker. And how about, the rest of the defensive numbers here? You had 5 sacks, 3 from Logan Montaigne, 1.5 from Logan Nagel, who's up to 8 now on the season. I think his stats were wrong earlier in the year. I think I said 10 sacks a couple weeks ago, but he's got 8 now. I think they're correct now. But Montaigne on the season, 79 tackles for 4 sacks, with 4 sacks, I should say. Bastante, 54 tackles and 6 sacks. So this defense, with the exception of one game, has been really good. And it's been a while since DePaul has been able to lean on the defense like this and play defense with confidence. So, and I could say this with confidence, they might have the best defense in non-public B for the first time in a couple years.
And Donovan Hugel, unbelievable matchup between two rivals. Hanover Park, a thrilling victory over West Essex, lived up to the hype in last weekend.
Yeah, I admittedly didn't know a ton about this rivalry heading into last Friday night, and there was a lot of juice in this game. This is a game that's been played since 1980, the Cardone Cup, but it's been on and off. 1980 was the inaugural year, and then they didn't play again until 88, and then they stopped playing in 2020 for some reason, and then the game got brought back in 2024. So this version of West Essex and Hanover Park, these players, they're new to this rivalry, so they were really chomping at the bit to play this game last Friday night. And, to add in, there was a little extra juice to this game. West Essex coach Dan Fulton was Hanover Park's coach for the last 7 seasons and had done a great job with them. So yeah, these two teams really went at it, and it kind of felt like a heavyweight battle, even though it's two smaller programs. And it really felt like, they both threw punches, they both made big plays. West Essex quarterback Jake Long was terrific. He rushed for over 250 yards. I believe it was 263 on 32 attempts. He ran for 3 touchdowns. He was incredible. But Jack Kovacs for Hanover Park just responded every single time. 134 yards through the air, 3 touchdowns. He had a touchdown pass in the third quarter where he fit the ball in on the sideline, and I have no idea how he did to Luke Morghese. It was just an unbelievable play. And the thing about Kovacs was, Hanover Park is really good. They were 7-0. This was their toughest game of the season so far. They hadn't really played an opponent like a West Essex. And also their West Essex coach knows Hanover Park so well, so you add that in. But the thing about this was that Hanover Park is good, but they would not have won this game without the ability of Kovacs to extend plays like he did. And that really showed on the last scoring drive for Hanover Park, where it was a 4th and 5, and Kovacs rolled to his left, evaded some tacklers, rolled back to his right, lobbed up a pass to Rocco Zerpoli in the back of the end zone for a touchdown that put them down 28-27. And then he essentially ran the same play on the next 2-point conversion, which was a very gutsy call by new Hanover Park coach Nick Liberato. But he's been chomping at the bit to win this game too. His dad won this game as Hanover Park's head coach from 97 to 2000. So, for Nick really wanted to add to that legacy and put his stamp on this game the first time he's able to coach in this. And that gutsy call paid off with with Kovacs hitting Garrett Walters by extending the play, hitting him in the back of the end zone to put them up 29-28. And it really looked like West Essex was going to win this game. I'm going to be completely honest. There was about 5 minutes left after Hanover Park scored. Long is moving downfield. He's just running. He's taking hits. He's going up the gut, but he's moving the chains. He's getting first downs. And then all of a sudden, on a first down with 30 seconds left, Angelo Churchello comes out of nowhere, punches the ball out. Ryan Medic, sophomore, recovers the ball in the back of the end. So he kind of curled up on it. It was pretty funny. Like he turtled over the ball because he thought it was going to get loose there at the back of the end zone. But yeah, this was an incredible game, and I honestly can't believe that it ended the way that it did with Long. He was so efficient in the end zone, and then all of a sudden this Hanover Park defense steps up, and they look better and better and better each week, and they're now 8-0 and looking like a sectional title contender in North 2.
I always love that this time of the year, even before the playoffs, you get games that start to feel and breathe like a playoff atmosphere and results. It just wets your palate for what we're going to be expecting coming up in the next couple of weeks. And guys, we get treated to seeing something like that where it's an actual conference championship game that we're going to be broadcasting on Friday. That's the NJIC Championship. No other conference has a conference title game. And just getting there was really interesting. Certainly, Donovan, for Rutherford, they had to bite their nails a bit and rally from behind against Woodridge just to get an opportunity to play for yet another NJIC championship.
Yeah, Woodridge made me look bad. I kind of, on last week's episode, kind of gave it to Woodridge a little bit after that Pagoda loss. But I mean, all the credit to Woodridge. They came out and they really gave Rutherford a game. Unfortunately for them, the special team struggles continued, and they missed a PAT after they went up 14, if they went up 13-7, would have been 14-7, missed the PAT. I believe it was a little wide left or, something like that. And then Rutherford, drives down the field. And this was really kind of that we look back at that Glen Rock game a couple weeks ago, and that's a big gut check game for Rutherford to get into the NJIC playoffs. And then this is their next gut check game, because after that Glen Rock game, they go out, they win by 2-3 possessions. They weren't really tested. Kind of felt like they were the favorite coming into this game. How did they respond? How did they respond to Woodridge really trying to get into that NJIC final? And it wasn't their best game by any stretch of the imagination, but I think the big thing for them was that they responded late and that they are in this championship game with a young team. I mean, Steve Dunn is just an unbelievable head coach. He's talked about it to me before, he's bringing back almost his entire starting lineup next year, which is huge for them. They're going to be much better next year than they are this year. And, I've said it before, coming into this season, he was pretty cautiously optimistic about this team, didn't really know where they were going to get to, missed the NJIC playoffs last year, and then to get back to it this year with this young team is really impressive. And even, Miles Balchin throwing that 15-yard touchdown pass to AJ Nunziato with 2:57 remaining. And then they get the PAT from Graham Jordan, and then they get the sack to turn the ball back over on downs to end the game. I believed it was to turn the ball back over on downs, but fourth quarter, fourth down defense, and they really responded late in order to get back into this NJIC final. And I think it's really impressive given their youth, but they are going to be going up against a Butler team that is the reigning champion and has an experienced quarterback in play. So it's going to be another tough test for them.
Nice little segue there to Ryan. And as much as we rightfully so laud praise on Rutherford, the team that has won the most NJIC championships, 4 of them, compared to any other school since this was started in 2014, you now are going up against a Butler team that, when I saw them in their season opener win against Becton way back when, they had some problems that they had to sort out offensively. Well, they've certainly sorted everything out. They are a well-oiled offensive machine right now, Ryan, and they're still the team to beat in the conference.
Yeah, this team might be peaking at the right time, Dan. It was a lot tighter in week 1 against Becton than it was last week. And David Smith, another 5-touchdown game. It's his second of the year. And it came with 4 rushing touchdowns again. He did it a couple weeks ago against Hasbrook Heights, a really good Hasbrook Heights team, and he did it again last week. So this was probably their best performance of the season, because Becton had won 5 in a row coming into this game. And offensively, they were playing really well. I mean, Eli Davis at quarterback has looked really good. Butler just showed up and brought their lunch pail on defense and kind of silenced that Wildcat offense. Butler this year, they're really good. I mean, don't get me wrong, but I think you've seen a little bit that they might not be the team they were a year ago, which, that's a high standard to hold yourself to. I mean, that's not the worst thing, because they were great last year, but maybe this past week kind of shows that they were saving some of their best stuff for later in the season. And maybe this team is more like last year's team than we thought it was, because this was a complete game. And this looks like a team right now that's just so hungry to defend their conference title. And I can't wait to break down, this game. This is going to be a really fun matchup here.
So guys, in breaking down this game, first off, when I was preparing for it and getting ready for our broadcast, and we always love going to Rutherford to call a game at Tryon Field, I can't believe that these two schools have never played one another. That is just the quirk of everything, where with the NJIC, you're only really playing a certain amount of teams. So they've never played each other. And then last year, you're having an opportunity potentially, but then Rutherford losing to Glen Rock put a wrench into that. And then Butler goes on to beat Glen Rock. How do you guys see this game playing out on Friday night at 6 p.m. in Rutherford?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it being the first time they're meeting each other. I guess, that says a lot about how much better Butler's gotten over the last couple of years, because you feel like Rutherford's always in it. I mean, look at Butler now. And I think the key for Butler in this game is going to be avoiding the big mistake, not giving Rutherford points on defense or special teams on a kick return or punt return, not, giving up a short field on a turnover, missed tackle in the open field, stuff like that, where Rutherford could capitalize. Butler doesn't have to play a perfect game because they're really good. And I think they've had a clear leg up on the conference all season, but there's still a sizable gap. I think that that gap is still there, but they can't give Rutherford any windows here, because as Donovan mentioned, Steve Dunn is a really good coach, and he's going to always have his kids, in a position to strike and capitalize on mistakes. So, and I never forget, like a couple years ago, they're playing Park Ridge in the conference final, and it's a monsoon. And I think you were there. Yeah, you remember that game, Dan?
I think I am still trying to dry off from that.
Yeah, Cole Hughes, that Park Ridge team was really good. And they were, I would have had them winning by like 2 scores going into the game. And, Miles Balchan, I think it was his first start as a freshman. And rain is just coming down in Park Ridge, and Rutherford dominated that game. I mean, they embraced the weather, as Greg Toll would say, make the weather your friend. And they made the weather their friend. And that's what Rutherford and Steve Dunn, that's what they've been over the last couple of years, and they're ready for anything. So, they're going to pounce whenever Butler makes a mistake. Butler just can't really afford to make the big one, because that's when Rutherford will kind of make you pay.
And Donovan, what do you feel about this NJIC final? Something that obviously is a special conference championship game in and of itself compared to all the other conferences in New Jersey football.
Yeah, I think when previewing this game, well, first off, it's honestly amazing to me also that this is the first time they're playing one another. I had no idea going into this game, which is just incredible. And they both have mascots or bulldogs, which I think is funny. But yeah, I think Ryan's spot on about, Butler not letting Rutherford kind of in the game with mistakes of their own. And I think to that end, for Rutherford, they are going to have to cause chaos. They're going to have to create havoc on defense. David Smith, very experienced quarterback, dual threat presence. They're the reigning champion. So you can't really, for me, like going in this game, like can't really put it into like experience as a factor, because Butler was here a year ago. Steve Dunn has been here a lot. Rutherford has won a lot of championships. So experience is kind of 50-50, pretty even in this game. So what are you going to do on the field to make a difference here? And I think that, that fourth quarter, like I alluded to a couple minutes ago, for Rutherford against Woodridge in the semifinal was a big opportunity for them. Both teams, them and Woodridge, in that semifinal, go scoreless in the third quarter at a halftime after it's 7-7. They give up the touchdown to Woodridge to start the third quarter, and then they go down with less than 3 minutes left and they score, and then the defense gets a stop late. So I think that is pretty much what they're going to do. I think it's just capitalizing on the positives that they do in this game after every single drive. Are they 3-and-out in a punt? Okay, go out and get a stop, right? Are you scoring a touchdown? Are you kicking a field goal to add on to the scoreboard? Okay, go out and get a stop, or keep Butler to only 3 points on the scoreboard, or keep them to under 10 points in the first half. I think that there is something there where they are really going to have to put Butler in a bind and make them have to chase a deficit or keep the game close, because clearly it's been shown by Rutherford in the past of the season that they are able to play well in close games. 3-0 win over Glen Rock, 14-13 over Woodridge, and clearly I think it's clear that they're going to have to make this game really hard on Butler and keep it low scoring, so that, that young core for them has a chance to make big plays late.
So it's going to be a lot of fun to see on Friday what transpires in the 2025 NJIC final. That's going to be again at Rutherford, a pair of 7-0 teams going toe-to-toe for a trophy. And then also, not only do you get the trophy, but the winner is really going to put themselves in a tremendous position to maybe garner one of those top seeds heading into the state postseason time for their respective groups. So we're going to keep an eye on what goes on there, as that is going to be part of our broadcast coverage this weekend for NJ.com. Now I bring Mike Kinney onto the Jersey Blitz for the first time. And Mike, you were witness to an outstanding rivalry in the Battle of the Oranges. West Orange outlasting East Orange in a game, if we're going to talk about playoff game feel, that had everything that you were looking for, with two heated rivals once again taking the field and West Orange emerging as a close victor.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. You could feel the electricity of this matchup in the parking lot without question. These two teams, it's commonplace, no matter what the situation is, these two teams are going to go after each other. They're basically neighbors. It's the Oranges Bowl. They're the best two teams in the Oranges. Two big Group 5 schools. They don't like each other a whole lot. They respect each other greatly. Athletes all over the place. But this one, just seemed particularly, because it was so close, this game being played so close to the start of the playoffs, you could just feel that energy in the building, and a packed house, and an excellent game. It became exactly the game I thought it would be. I even wrote in my story, you expected a black and blue game, toe-to-toe game. It was exactly that. What I didn't expect was for the heroes of the game to be the snapper, the holder, and the place kicker in a 14-13 game. It was everything you wanted it to be, everything is advertised as far as it being a defensive slugfest. And honestly, I love those games. A lot of people can't stand a game like that. They want to see offense. They want to see brilliant catches. Now, I saw there were brilliant catches in the game, but it was all about defense. But really, what it came down to was the precise snapping of Josh Pineda of West Orange is only a sophomore, the holding of Joseph Palumbo, and the kicking of Aaron Godinez, who hit both of his PATs, that being his one of those being the deciding point in that 14-13 game. But also East Orange's inability early in the game to get a clean snap on a punt landed at the 7-yard line for West Orange, and West Orange took it in on the first play. A touchdown run by Farad Green, and that gave West Orange momentum. The lead and momentum that, certainly helped carry them through the game. East Orange did come back and actually took the lead in the second half. So great deal of East Orange brushing that big mistake off and coming back, but they couldn't kick the PAT when they scored their second touchdown, and that could have tied the game and forced overtime and made a big difference. So West Orange on the little details wins the game, but it was physically exactly what you expect. After the game, John L. Grant, his quote to me was, it's a 12-rounder every time we play. And the winner is the one who can last. It's not the one with the most finesse. It's not the one who's the fastest. It's not the one with the most glamorous statistics. It's the one who can last in this game. And he said, and we were just the guys who were lucky. And I asked him, do you think like last year, if anybody recalls, West Orange won that kind of a game 7-0 in the regular season? East Orange came back to win that kind of game in the playoffs and won the sectional championship. So I asked Darnell, do you expect to see these guys again? He goes, oh, yeah, count on it. No doubt about it. So I'm looking forward to another West Orange game. And I know everybody in East Orange and West Orange agrees with me on that. And we all hope to be together at a game in the tournament with those two.
And very interesting seeing that when we covered West Orange earlier this season, it was their mistakes on special teams that eventually cost them in losing on a last-second field goal by Shabazz. They sorted that around and now have learned from the mistakes at the beginning of the season to pay off with a win later on against their arch rival. And Mike, looking at the Big Central, talk about big wins. Montgomery with a statement win over previously undefeated and ranked Sayreville.
Yeah, a statement win 1 week after Montgomery's really, truly inability to stop the running game. Josh Allen ran all over the place. And it was I just talked about offensive games. That was an offensive game. A lot of fun, though. But Montgomery had great trouble in the second half. First half, it was a close game, but in the second half, they had great trouble stopping Josh Allen of Woodbridge, and he kind of ran all over them. Well, in this game, they've got to face in the Sayreville Montgomery game, they've got to face now Sean Jackson, who is not only at least as good as Josh Allen. He's a guy who's been doing it for 3 years. Josh Allen is a first-year phenomenon as running back. So Montgomery has to face now Sean Jackson, who is unbelievably, and I just talked about 2 weeks ago when Sayreville played Piscataway about the great running game, the balanced running game that Sayreville had. So honestly, I believe that Montgomery was going to have some trouble stopping the running game. I thought Sayreville was in the process of generating a ground attack that was more than Jackson, that was going to be really made for the playoffs now. You go in the playoffs, you want a running game. I thought Sayreville had it. Now, I think in the beginning of this game, it showed that Sean Jackson ripped off a 94-yard touchdown run early in the game, set the tone for Sayreville. At the half, Montgomery ended up eking out a lead, but at the half, it was only 16-15. And if I'm at that game, I'm thinking, Sayreville, second half with their running game, this is going to be trouble for Montgomery, just like Woodbridge game. Montgomery made some outstanding adjustments defensively. And offensively, the running game belonged to Caden Miller from Montgomery, who I think surprised everybody, rushing for 4 touchdowns. Just all of a sudden, Montgomery's running game was something sensational, and their defense stepped up tremendously with Michael Bellamy and Dragonis Georgiev and Youssef Al-Sherbini just controlling the line of scrimmage. After Jackson's first run of 94 yards, he was held to like 50-something yards the rest of the game. And Montgomery ends up with a 43-15 win. So yeah, Dan, not only did they answer the call after the loss to Woodbridge and tight first half, but they were phenomenal. So Montgomery right now is turning the page. They're holding right now a number 5 seed in North 4. And these guys were 1-9 last year. So this team is one of the biggest, representing one of the biggest turnarounds, I think, in all of New Jersey this year. What a great job they did. And what great momentum they're bringing into the playoffs next week.
Now we take a look at the short conference and we bring on Joe Zadalis to talk about what's been going on over the last week or so. And you had Joe, Brick Memorial, outlasting Southern in that matchup where you liken it to the hare versus the tortoise. And Brick Memorial is a very dangerous team right now at this point of the season.
No question, Dan. And, from the way the seedings appear like they will go, they're going to avoid Winslow until the semifinals, the state semifinals, which is good for them, which means I think they have the potential to make a little bit of run in the playoffs. And the Brick Memorial Southern game was pretty much like I thought it would be. Southern couldn't do anything offensively until the late in the game, which kind of surprised me. But, one thing about Brick Memorial is just when you think they have enough offensive options, they come up with somebody else. This week, tight end Joe Livio, who nobody had ever heard of before last Friday night, caught 8 passes and a touchdown, kept a lot of drives alive. So, Brick Memorial is playing well right now. They still have that strange 15-14 loss to Donovan Catholic hanging over their head, and I'm sure they would like to do something to get out from under that. And listen, I don't think Southern Regional is a bad team. I just don't think they are explosive. They're methodical, and they need time, and they need to be able to run the ball for everything else they do on offense to work effectively.
And Joe, the team that has really been the standard bearer and the flag bearer in the Shore Conference this year have been the Casey's Red Band Catholic. We talked about last week how they had a big opportunity to make a statement, potentially sew up the number 1 seed in non-public B with a win at Paramus Catholic. Well, that did not happen as they got humbled by the Paladins. They were knocked from the realm of the unbeaten. And now this Casey team has to answer some questions. How do you feel like they are going to have the opportunity to bounce back and now might have to be heading on the road if they're going to have another rematch potentially against the Paladins or someone else down the line in non-public B?
Dan, first of all, I think Red Bank Catholic schedule in some ways gave them a false sense of security. Folks who listen to this podcast know that I have said the Shore Conference is not especially stout this year. The division that Red Bank Catholic is in is normally one of the best in the Shore. It is not. With Rumson struggling with injury, not being very good. The 2 middle towns aren't as strong as they are in the past. Homedale is having a great season. And, Marlboro probably doesn't even belong in that league. But, Red Bank Catholic has faced 2 decent offensive teams now. Homedale was one, and they won that one by a point, by the skin of their teeth. And they went up to Paramus Catholic. And it's not like they played poorly on offense. I mean, if you go through and you look at the statistics for Red Bank Catholic, their freshman quarterback had a decent enough game. Their freshman running back had a decent enough game, but they couldn't finish off drives, Dan. They settled for 3 field goals, and that wound up costing them. And the other thing I think that's a little bothersome from me on the outside looking in is that Red Bank Catholic isn't getting the ball down the field. Early in the season, they relied on, wide receiver screens and bubbles and slip screens, to create some space. And right now they're not doing it. And I wonder if this game gave future opponents a little bit of something to look for. If you can limit Gabe Kemp, the freshman running back, and make Ramir Rivera, the quarterback, beat you, is a lot of that stuff going to be underneath. And I wanted to ask Ryan because how this does impact the seedings. I guess now DePaul will clearly be the 1. Paramus Catholic has the 2. And I've asked this question to you guys before we started tonight. What if, by some stretch of the imagination, Donovan Catholic beats St. Joe Metuchen next week? Does RBC get the 4 and end up with DePaul in the semifinals? I mean, I'm interested to know what Ryan thinks about that, and if he has any insight to what Paramus Catholic did to really unmask RBC.
Yeah, I was surprised with the defense here for PC in that game, Joe, and they haven't done that all season. And, Joe mentioned strength of schedule for RBC being a false sense. That's the name of the game for PC. I mean, they're battle tested. So, RBC didn't necessarily play the schedule that had them ready for this game, in my opinion, and PC did. And, PC doesn't play in the United White they play in the red, which has Bergen, Bosco, and Joe. So they have to play all those teams. It's a gauntlet. And could they go back in the rankings? They go up to 15. Could they fall out of the rankings after a loss to Bosco this week? Probably, especially if it's lopsided. But the non-public B pecking orders change with this game, and I think that's all that really matters here for PC, and that's certainly all they care about. And if I told Coach Russo, hey, you guys are going to fall out of the rankings with a loss to Bosco, he'd probably tell me, I don't really care. I'm just getting myself ready for this game, against Bosco, and get ready for the playoffs here by playing this game. And I think PC with this win over RBC secured home field, until the state final, should they make it. And, I think they can win a rematch with DePaul. They absolutely could. They led at halftime a couple weeks ago. And I talked to you guys about this before the call. They're pretty much the Pope John of last year, but even better. That Pope John team in a lot of ways was kind of all Tyleek Hill. It was a one-man wrecking crew. And this Paramus Catholic team is good all around, and they're doing it with their backup quarterback right now, the Bergenfield native, Rowan Martin. He's a sophomore. He's played really well. Nakai Martin, really good pass catcher. Chikuma Odo, Achilles DuPont, two great running backs for them. AJ Lopez could stretch the field. He's a sophomore. He's got a lot of offers. And then, the starting quarterback, Marco Green, if he comes back, that makes them even better. But, the defense is going to be the key for them here down the stretch, especially in a rematch with DePaul if that happens. But you mentioned Donovan, Joe. What's made them a player here? Could they be on the 4 line, the 3 line with a win over St. Joe's Met? What's made them, a team to watch here? There's a couple really clutch wins for them here over the last couple weeks.
I don't know. They're like a cat, and they have 9 lives. 3 of their last 4 wins have come in the final minute, which is kind of remarkable if you think about it. Last week, they recovered a fumble in the end zone with Manalapan on Donovan's 2-yard line. Manalapan's going to kick a field goal and win the game, and there's a bad snap from center, and the ball gets booted around, and they recover it. I think Donovan right now is dangerous simply because they're finally starting to gel as a team. The Seton Hall transfer, Davis, had a big game last night, and he was out a month. So that's a month they didn't practice together. He's only starting to get to know his receivers now. I'll be honest with you, Donovan RBC would be one heck of a football game. And I don't think that's a game RBC really wants to see. I really think they would like Donovan Catholic to be in the other bracket. But Donovan is just playing very well. Like I wrote in my story the other night, the one thing head coach Dan Curcione is happy about is that his team plays 48 minutes. And that's because they have to, and they need every one of them. So, I'm going to go up on my non-public seating committee soapbox for a minute. When these guys go into the bunker in Robbinsville after they leave the black SUVs, nobody knows how they're going to seed anybody. How are they going to view Paramus Catholic given the schedule they played? How are they going to view RBC given the schedule it's played? And the same thing with Donovan Catholic. Remember, Donovan Catholic started 1-3. We could all say who we think should be where, but we have no idea how that public seating committee is going to look at these teams, Dan.
That is a tremendous teaser, Joe, for in a couple weeks' time, everybody make sure to get back to listen here on the Jersey Blitz when it comes time for the non-public B seating. And then we have a rundown because Joe did not hold back last year, and rightfully so, with what that committee did, and proved that they were wrong because Paramus Catholic benefited from a higher seed, and then they were bounced by Pope John right away in the playoffs. So make sure, folks, when we're going to be having a breakdown of certainly the public school ranks, that's pretty much straightforward. That's the computers. That's statistically proven. This is where you're going to be seated. But in a couple weeks' time, make sure to listen in because I can't wait to hear if there's any controversy. We're not going to hold back and sugarcoat things here in the Jersey Blitz when it comes to the non-public takes. Now, guys, I'm going to need one takeaway from each of you a week before the postseason begins in the public school ranks. So we're going to start with Ryan Patty. What do you have as a takeaway before the postseason gets underway for the public schools?
Yeah, Kevin kind of teased it earlier this episode, and I said it last year before the playoffs of Winslow in Group 4 that I don't see a team from up north beating them. And I kind of feel the same way, obviously, about Winslow again and Glassboro. And I'm starting to feel that way about Group 5 with Township, as Kevin teased. And I go through, we all do, we all go through our group and conference ranks each week. And, Group 5 is always that group we struggle with. It's just not a top heavy group. And I look at North 5 right now, and Passaic Tech is different than they were in week 0. They've gave Miles back under center. He sat his necessary weeks for the transfer rules, but I'm not sure they're at the level of Washington Township after seeing what Ramapo did to them a couple weeks ago. And West Orange, they have a win over Passaic Tech and East Orange, but nothing's indicated they could beat a team like Township. And Union City's not what they were the last couple years. And I don't want to speak on behalf of Mike's teams in the Big Central, but Bridgewater, Raritan, Piscataway, Elizabeth, all those teams, we've kind of played musical chairs with them in our Group 5 rankings. And I'm not sure if they're on, the Township level. I think Township's, a juggernaut as much as Winslow and Glassboro is, although they played that game against Kingsway last week. It was a tight game, but there's, maybe some landmines in the South, Kingsway, like I just mentioned, Sayreville, TRN, Atlantic City, all good teams, but I'm just not sure there's a team on Township's level. I think they're right up there with Glassboro and Winslow as, a surefire favorite in their respective groups.
Donovan, what is the takeaway that you have right now heading into just before the start of the postseason?
Yeah, so I'm looking at some teams that coming into the year, I would not have expected them to be in as good of positions as they are in now. And that's Kinnelon in North Group 1, that's Roxbury in North Group 3, and that's also in Bogota also in North Group 1. And, coming into the year, just from conversations had with coaches around the state and Kinnelon coach Dustin Grande, I would have predicted that Kinnelon make the playoffs. I would not have predicted them to be a top 6 spot in North Group 1 right now, but they got off to their best start in program history, 7-0 record. And then they missed the playoffs also by 1 spot last year, bring back most of their team, which is why I would have predicted they make the playoffs. But that 7-0 record really stands out. And then Mike Ryan and I talked about this on Sunday, or on Monday, actually on Monday morning. But that 28-14 loss that they had to Shabazz on Friday night, it's a loss, but that's a loss that's like, I would have expected it to be a lot worse than it was, 28-14. It's a loss where they hung around with a very good Group 1 team in Shabazz. And then Roxbury has completely turned it around this year with a 5-3 record. To me, Ryan Rooms has done an absolutely incredible job of coaching up a team this year. Last year, they only won 1 game, and then they face heavy graduations coming into this year. They throw a bunch of sophomores into high-pressure roles. They win 4 straight games. They knock off Mont. I don't remember all the teams they beat, but it was this incredible run, and then they run into West Morris on Friday night, and they lost that game, which was pretty understandable. But to be 5-3 at this point of the season after going 1-8 last year with a bunch of sophomores and high pressure roles is very surprising to me. And then Bogota still kind of towing that line in North Group 1, but they should win this weekend over Palisades Park and get in. And this is going to be their first playoff appearance since 2014. And that Woodridge win from a couple of weeks ago for them is absolutely massive right now for their PowerPoints and still staying in that playoff standing. So I'm just looking at basically how much longer can these 3 teams keep it going, because they're all in much better positions than I thought that they would be coming into the year. And then, if I may, I have one other quick hitter. I was talking to Westwood AD and the SFC scheduling director earlier today, Dan Vivino, and the possibilities in North Group 2 this weekend are absolutely nuts. Pretty much teams 1 through 13 are safe. Newton is in 13th place. They're kind of towing that line a little bit, but they're playing Mountain Lakes, who's a good team. So I think regardless of the result there, they'll get some good power points from that win and get in. But then you essentially have Waldwick, Beckton, and Dayton are the 14 through 16, but Vernon 17, Lyndhurst 18, Mawa 19, and Cresskill 20 are all pretty much still alive, depending on the results heading into this week. And I won't get into the specific games for all those teams, because that's going to take a billion hours to talk about. But essentially, you have 6 teams fighting for 3 spots coming into this final weekend in North Group 2. So, I mean, essentially, win and you're in. If you're Waldwick, Beckton, and Dayton, you don't really have to worry about anything there, unless, PowerPoints and all that calculation stuff that, that Joe's going to go on a rant about in a few weeks. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of possibilities here in North Group 2 for teams 14 through 20. And, it's still surprising me even that Cresskill is still alive in 20. So North Group 2 is going to be a lot. It's going to be a big one to watch this weekend.
Joe, what's the takeaway that you have heading into the final week of the regular season for the public schools?
Well, my takeaway centers around Rumson. They lost again last week to Tonsor North, and Tonsor North struggles. since the start of the year have been well documented. Granted, North is on a little bit of a roll now and is even their record at 4-4, but I have some real concerns with Rumson. I know they're beat up. I know they're missing their number one tailback, Kellen Murray, but Ryder Izzo has more than made up for his absence. But what I don't understand is Rumson on defense. They've given up 29 to Middletown North, 34 to Red Bank Catholic, and 37 last week to Tonsor North. That's their last 3 games. Now, I know Jeremy Schulte doesn't give a hoot about the regular season. He wants to win state championships. I know they're missing 4, maybe 5 regulars on defense. My question is, can this team put the pieces back together enough to get into get into a playoff run? As it stands now, they would get Point Pleasant Borough in the semifinals. Now listen, Rumson beat Point Borough 34-0 on opening day. I do not think it will be that lopsided if they play again, at least against the Rumson team in its current state. And then they're still going to be in the same bracket with Camden. Can they beat Camden? I don't know. But I think there are some current concerns with Rumson at this point in the year, and we've just become so accustomed to them making a run in the tournament and being around when we hit November. And I don't know that that's going to be the case.
Kevin, what are some of your takeaways 1 week before the start of the postseason for the public schools down in South Jersey?
Dan, the thing that kind of sticks out to me, and obviously we have we have this weekend to get through before we even really start thinking about the tournament, is the teams that we thought were going to be good at the beginning of the season, the teams that got off to pretty decent starts, are the teams that are there. They're the teams that we figured would be where they are today. Washington Township, Winslow, Glassboro. These teams are all where we thought they would be. They have answered the bell. Winslow obviously tested itself with those 2 big, huge games with IMG and Bergen. Haven't lost since. Township, we've talked about them. And Glassboro, they just pile up points week after week and, seem to be, an unstoppable machine. And then, you're looking in group 2 and 3, Camden in 2 and Burlington Township in 3. They've done nothing to this point for me or for anybody else really in South Jersey to warrant them not being favorites in their groups. So I think the big thing, like I said, the big thing I'm taking away at this point is that those teams that we thought would be there are really right there and just knocking on the door for everything to get ready to start.
And Mike Kinney, what do you see as some of your takeaways with this lead up to the postseason?
Here's one of the things I'm going to throw a little curveball into the whole conversation right now and say that my takeaway is how unfortunate it is that a team like Weequahic won't be playing in the playoffs. They were disqualified along with Westside from an incident on the field on September 27th. A game Weequahic was winning handedly, and a fight broke out on the sidelines. Players left the sideline, and I'm not saying the state rule is unfair. I certainly understand the reason behind it, but I've always had a little bit of a problem about the leaving the bench situation complete, automatic disqualification, regardless of what the situation is. I understand that there's a level of order that must be restored, and that's a way to do it. That if more than 2 players leave the bench, you're automatically disqualified, and if you have more than 2 disqualifications in an entire season, you're not eligible for the postseason. Well, that's Weequahic's situation. There's Westside's as well, but Westside is not having a good season at all. But Weequahic is disqualified from the playoffs. So their playoff is Friday. Their playoff is Friday in Hanover Park. They're playing an 8-0 Hanover Park team that is seed right now, the number 5 seed in North 2. If Weequahic were eligible, they'd be the number 8 seed right now in North 3, meaning they'd have a home game in the first round. And that's too bad. So their playoff game comes Friday. They could spoil things, maybe knock Hanover Park a couple rings down on the North 2 standings, certainly ruin an undefeated season, and also get a little head of steam going for Weequahic for its Thanksgiving Soul Bowl against a Shabazz team that it has been able to handle the last couple of years. Shabazz, by that time, could be well headed to another state final as they were last year. So I think, Paul Jones and Mickey Armour and Sveven St. Fleur and Ty Sean Boyd and the rest of the Weequake team and Coach Brian Logan are looking at this game as their playoff game. It's unfortunate that that they're out. So, that's the takeaway. Can Weequake spoil things for Hanover Park and get a little bit of a reward for this season, which is otherwise very empty because they're not making the playoffs?
So those were some of the takeaways from our guys leading into the start of the postseason, as this is going to be the regular season finale this week for many of the public schools around the Garden State. Now we're going to shift to looking at some of the impact players that either could be the ones that drive their team to the postseason if they're near the edge, or can power them through the postseason and maybe lead to a championship ending. So guys, starting off with Ryan, who are some of your impact players who can lift their teams into and during the postseason?
Yeah, I'm looking at Steve Klein from Westwood here, Dan. He's the senior Boston College commit. He's a running back, a linebacker, and coming into the season, I actually sold your buddy Bobby Guy and his Cardinals a bit short. I picked Ramsey to win the American Red based on what they had coming back from last year, and Ramsey's certainly no slouch. They can make a run in North too, but and because that offense is high octane. I mean that offense can move the ball, but after seeing Westwood beat Pascack Valley in week 1 in person, I kind of knew, my prediction was toast and Westwood would win the division. But Westwood kind of, put it away last week against Ramsey 34-7, and they locked up the division. But I'm very impressed with how far along the supporting cast has come for Westwood. But it all starts with Klein. Steve Klein is the guy there. He's got 950 yards, 14 touchdowns, 109 carries. He's got 123 yards and 2 touchdowns receiving on only 10 catches. He's got 88 tackles on defense, 7 tackles for loss, and 2 interceptions. So, he's an absolute beast. He doesn't come off the field. He's gone over 100 yards in 5 of their 7 games. He has scored in all but 1 game. And last week was actually the first week where he didn't have double-digit tackles. So Westwood 7-1. They're number 1 in North 2 in the United Power rankings. They, with a win over Riverdale, would lock up home field throughout the North 1 playoffs. And the only reason we don't have them in our Group 2 rankings is because they have that loss to Caldwell, which I think we could all forgive now. I mean, Caldwell's 3-4. I know they're 3-4, but that's a very hard schedule they've played. But the bottom line here, I mean, Steve Klein, he gives this team a shot at going deep in the playoffs. He's got a younger brother, Nick, who's pretty good too. He's a sophomore. So that Klein family, you had Joe a couple years ago. You got Steve now. You got Nick on the way. He's an underclassman right now. It's pretty good to be a Klein in Westwood.
Mike Kenny, who's an impact player that can lift their team heading into the postseason?
Yeah, Dan, I think my fellow colleagues here would probably expect me to say Zayden McDonald from Shabazz or Sean Jackson from Sayreville, Brody Nugent, the quarterback for Old Bridge, guys I've been talking about all year, leaders of teams that are very strong and have great chances in the playoffs. But I'm going to say Abel Paul, the scrappy, elusive running back from Livingston. Livingston is a team that hasn't made the playoffs since 2022. Right now, they're having an excellent season at 5-3, and a big reason for that is the way that Abel Paul can run the ball. He can get away from people, and he's not afraid to run through people with his 5'9", 170-pound body. And if he can get things going, right now, Livingston is the 8th seed in North 5, meaning that they could have a home game, and they could play a team like maybe an Irvington or a Ridgewood in the first round, a Bayonne, somebody like that. And Livingston's already proven itself against Irvington. And I think that they could win a first round game and maybe surprise somebody after that if he is running the ball well. Because when he is, Troy Naylor's a better quarterback, and Christian Giordano is a between the tackles, fullback type who complements Abel so well. But Abel is such a tough runner and such a surprise, really. He's a kid. He's got almost 1,400 yards rushing. He's surprised a lot of people. Livingston is the team. Keep your eye on them with Abel Paul, a team that, is not always talked about in the postseason.
Kevin, who do you see as an impact player down in South Jersey heading into that postseason push?
Dan, we talk an awful lot about guys like Jalen Parker at Winslow and Brandon Simmons at Glassboro and the Saab brothers and even mentioned, a little bit about Cole Aquino at Washington Township. But the guy that kind of sticks out to me right now is Aiden Binns. He's a junior running back at Burlington Township. And, Burlington Township's in the top 20. They're 8-0. They have a chance to go 9-0 for the first time since 2018 with a win this weekend and to win their division title. But, the offense for them begins and ends with Aiden Binns. And, he's been a dynamic running back for them. Last year, he's their leading rusher with only 593 yards. This year, at this point, through 8 games, he's among the state leaders. He's more than doubled his production already. Close over 1,350 yards, 16 touchdowns, and really has been the offense for them. Burlington Township lost its starting quarterback in Bryce Carter to injury. They have a freshman in there now, Eddie McNair, who's doing a really nice job, but he's a freshman. And as the playoffs begin and as you try to progress through the playoffs, obviously the pressure mounts and the games become seemingly tougher. So they're going to need Aiden Binns to continue to run the football effectively, which means the offensive line is going to have to continue to do its job too. But, Aiden has rushed for over 100 yards, in the last 6 straight games. And, had a career high 318 and 4 touchdowns in a win earlier, midway through the season against Morristown. But, like I said, they're a team that doesn't score a ton of points when the competition is a little tougher. They've racked up in the 40s and the 50s against some weaker competition. But, recently they've played some tougher teams, and Burlington City 8-0, Hopewell Valley 28-14, and last week Northern Burlington 27-14. Aiden Binns has touchdowns in all those games and significant rushing totals. So, if Burlington Township wants to get past that first round, which they failed to do last year, as I believe a top seed or close to it, Aiden Binns is the guy who's going to have to, take that ball and run with authority like he has all season.
Donovan, who's your impact player to watch?
I'm going to take a page out of Mike Kinney's book here. As easy as it would be for me to pick someone like Braden Longo from Mount Olive, who's been terrific this year with over 1,000 rushing yards, I'm going to go with Dylan Ferrara from Waldwick, who is the quarterback and running back for the Warriors. And, alluding to North Group 2 a few minutes ago, Waldwick is one of those teams that's on the edge. They're in the 14th slot right now. They're playing a good New Milford team this week who is in Group 1. But Waldwick has quietly kind of crept up these North Group 2 rankings these last 2 weeks because they've been on this 4-game win streak. And Dylan Ferrara has been a major point in this win streak. Against Pompton Lakes, 246 yards, 4 touchdowns. Against North Arlington, 261 yards, 3 touchdowns. Cresskill, 237, 3 touchdowns. Garfield, 203 and 1 touchdown. So this kid has been on an absolute tear these last few weeks, and he's put Waldwick, pretty single-handedly put Waldwick in playoff position here. And, going up against a New Milford defense that allowed under 100 yards rushing last game, he's going to have to put in a really good effort. And, New Milford knows that he's going to run the ball. Everybody in the room in the stadium knows that Ferrara is going to get the ball for Waldwick. How is he going to be able to perform against a defense that played very well last week and maybe guarantee Waldwick a playoff spot with a win this weekend?
And Joe, who do you have as an impact player to watch heading into that playoff push?
Well, Dan, I would love to be able to tell you that, the running back from Manasquan, Ace Etienne, could be one of those guys who could carry Manasquan to a lengthy run in the tournament, or I mentioned Ryder Izzo, and I have talked about it nauseum about Jason LaQuara down at Brick Memorial. But I think if you're looking at one player who really can put a team on his back and carry them to a couple of wins, maybe even a sectional title, I have to go with the Shore Conference Superman, and that's Jack Cannon at Homedale. I mean, he's done it all season, and you know who's getting the ball, who's throwing the ball, and he's managed to lead Homedale to quite a few victories this year. They probably should have or could have beat Red Bank Catholic. They've won 2 in a row now. They had a rough 2-game stretch, but we'll forgive them for that because they had losses to Red Bank Catholic and Brick Memorial. But, they've scored over 90 points in their last 2 games. And if you look where they sit in the bracket, projecting in Central 3, they're going to be they would be the two behind Burlington Township. They could get Matawan in the first round. Can Matawan, with all that sophomore talent, beat Homedale in the first round? Yes, but you better have some kryptonite to stop Superman. And then, the winner of the Ewing Somerville game would be next. And, if Homedale can play just a little bit of defense, that and Jack Cannon wearing the cape, Homedale's a dangerous team in the state tournament, Dan.
All right, guys, we've reached our last segment of this episode here in the Jersey Blitz. We're going to be looking for the most impactful games in Week 8. It's going to have a factor on playoff seeding, and then obviously we're going to finish it off by having that top 3 matchup in Ordell, St. Joe's versus BC. Ryan, you have a great, juicy matchup that has really developed into maybe the best public school rivalry of the last 5 years or so in Bergen County and in North Jersey. Number 9 Ramapo, they're traveling to number 10 Northern Highlands. And these two teams, they typically find a way to find each other in the state playoffs. That might be the case again based on the playoff PowerPoints that could come to the victor in this one.
Yeah, and get this, it could happen really early, and I'll explain that in a second. Not only is this a top 10 matchup, it's for the Liberty Red title. The scenario here, if Ramapo wins, could be ridiculous. But if Highlands wins, they control home field throughout the North 4 playoffs. And Ramapo, because of the new Northern number element, they'd be probably the 2 or 3 seed in that section with Highlands, and they would play for a sectional final in all likelihood, between each other. But if Ramapo wins and Mount Olive and Peaburg win their games, which who knows? I mean, West Morris could beat Mount Olive. I'm going to pick Mount Olive, and I'm going to pick Peaburg, this week as well. But Mount Olive in that instance would be the 1 seed in, say, North 1, and then Peaburg would be the 1 in North 2. And because of the Northern thing, Ramapo and Highlands would be in the same section, and they would, be the 2 and 3 seed, and they would meet in the sectional semifinals. So, 2 top 10 teams could meet in the sectional semifinals, not in a sectional final or a state semi, in the sectional finals. And it kind of reminds me of a couple of years ago when Millville played Mainland, in the sectional finals in a game that should have been a state semifinal. It sure felt like a state final too, but we're not going to get 32 team super sections, where Bergen Field or something like that's going down to Winslow. But you get my point, right? Like the Northern stuff is crazy because you're not necessarily, potentially you're not, getting the best teams through. And I know a lot of coaches, they don't like this. And me personally, I hope it's temporary too, but I digress. I think Friday's game is going to be very fun and it could create some drama here.
Could you go a little into detail about what you're talking about with that grouping that you're saying that could lead potentially to a sectional semifinal, like you said, against a Ramapo and Northern Highlands? What was that change that was made?
Yeah, I'll keep it simple. Ultimately, they're going to take the top 2 teams from each super section, and they're going to be the top 2 teams in the respective sections. So you're going to get the best 2 in South, let's say South 1. You're going to get one's going to go in Central, one's going to go in South, and then in the North, same thing. One's going to go in North 1, one's going to go in North 2. The rest of the super section is based on location, essentially. So they're going to take one section and make it location based, the other section make it location based. That's the gist of it. But ultimately, if there could be a lot of teams in one location that are really good, and all of a sudden, they're making up the top 4 seeds or whatever. So you're not necessarily getting the best teams through. And, I think in a sport like wrestling where, teams are going all over, like Paulsboro comes up north, whether it's to wrestle in a tournament or, wrestle a team in a sectional final, whatever, like they're making multiple trips up north. And that's why it's so great. Like, I think you got to be willing to get on a bus and go make it right. So where the best teams are getting in, but that's for another discussion. I think a lot of people have a problem with what happened this offseason with that rule change, but we'll see. Everything's going to sort itself out the next week. So we're going to find out where everyone is and what happens.
It's a great point, seeing that I even called those matches Paulsboro wrestling at Kittatinny. I mean, that's a long trip, but boy, is the matchups worth it. Was not even aware of that. So kudos to you for bringing that up and what could possibly transpire in those type of matchups in a very, very competitive and stacked North Group 4. Mike Kinney, what are some of the impactful games that you're keeping an eye on when it comes to playoff seeding this week?
A game I'm really looking at is in North 4. Montgomery against Rahway. I talked about Montgomery earlier in the segment about them not stopping Josh Allen of Woodbridge 2 weeks ago. His ability to run the football. Last week, doing a great job in the second half against Sean Jackson of Sayreville, two of the top running backs in the Big Central, no doubt about it. Well, they got to face another one, Andrew Avent from Rahway, who is absolutely stunning as both a running back and a linebacker. He's a 4-year player for Rahway. He set three separate records and went over 4,000 yards rushing. He's already Rahway's all-time rushing leader, but he broke 3 other rushing records and scoring records last week against New Brunswick, career and season. So now Montgomery, the number 5 seed in North 5, has to deal with Andrew Avent and Zaire Fields and the rest of that Rahway team, Rahway needs this game to make sure that they get into the playoffs. They're number 16, so they are fighting for their life, while Montgomery, as the number 5 seed, is fighting for home games in North 4. And I just think it's really interesting because Montgomery, now this is the 3rd straight week that they've got to deal with probably the top 3 running backs in the Big Central Conference. So we'll see if what they did in the second half against Sayreville holds up now against Rahway on Friday night in Rahway. So I'm really, really riveted to that game. I think that's going to be a really great game. I think Montgomery goes in as with an edge, but I do not discount what Andrew Avent and his guys are able to do.
And Joe, you have a couple of games that you're interested in for the Shore Conference, and they could play a big part in terms of playoff seeding.
Absolutely, Dan. I will say this just to rebuttal what Ryan had said about the state tournament, and I've always been a believer in that. At some point, you have to beat the best team, and I don't know that necessarily makes a difference if you have to do it in the semifinals or the finals. I think in a lot of ways we've become, too enamored with trying to get, the best final. You got to win somewhere, but I digress there. The Shore Conference, Dan, this year, right now, there are no undefeated teams in the Shore Conference. There are only 2 winless teams in the Shore Conference. So, back a couple of weeks ago when Kevin and I had that little back and forth about the WJFL in Glassboro, you see what taking time and trying to give teams competitive schedules can be. And then with that, that's my segue into this. We have 3 games this week that will decide division championships in the Shore Conference. The first one is Toms River East is at Pinelands. Both Toms River East and Pinelands are both number 16 in their respective sections. Pinelands in South 3, Toms River East in South 4. Here's the other thing. Pinelands has never won an outright division title, and the school has been open since 1979. They have 1 co-championship, and that was in 1984. They've only made the state tournament twice. I think they're in already, but a win secures their spot to get in the state tournament. Now, while I would normally think it's not such a great idea to be 16 and go get the daylights beat out of you, it's a big step for John Tierney's program. Another game we have is Neptune and Raritan. Neptune was 2-7 3 years ago. They're 7-1 right now. They're looking to win their first division championship since 1986 under John Amabile, the legendary Shore Conference wild man. And then there's Shore Regional playing Matawan this week. Matawan, while it has such an amazing tradition, has won only 1 divisional title in the last 10 years. So in the Matawan division, we're looking at tri-champs, Dan. Matawan beat Manasquan. Manasquan beat Red Bank. Red Bank beat Matawan. So you know what? It's a great week for those teams that are trying to build back their programs. And I think that's a great thing for football in the Shore Conference. And I think it's a model that other conferences in the state can follow. I know, the SFC has done a great job with their Ivy division. So, but, there's going to be some places cheering for teams this weekend that haven't done so in a long time down the shore.
Kevin, what are some of the most impactful games that you're looking at when it comes time for postseason seeding down in South Jersey?
Well, Dan, this week in the West Jersey League is essentially championship weekend. I believe there's only one division that's been decided amongst the 16. So division titles are on the line pretty much every division, some outright, some ties, some potentially being a three-way tie for a title. But when you look at the playoff situation and the teams in the South, it's the bottom that's the biggest quote unquote concern. You look in South 1, and Clayton, Highland Park, and Maple Shade, 15, 16, 17, all play on Saturday. Their UPR is so close that there's no guarantee that the team that's sitting at 15 is going to get in, or the team that's at 16 will be okay to get in. Maple Shade is at 17. They could jump them both. So that's kind of the theme for South Jersey this weekend, in that there are so many games involving teams that are borderline playoff teams right now that, if you win, maybe you're not necessarily in. You're going to need help from somebody else. There's other games that you absolutely are going to have to win, or else you're out. And there's going to be games where, well, we probably aren't going to win, so we got to hope that A, B, and C take care of business, and that will help us. So as far as the South is concerned, I'm not so much intrigued with specific games, because there are so many that are impactful for those last seeds. And there's other games, of teams that are potentially, right now we would look at it and say, okay, they're in. But if a game involving, say, in Group 2, involving Willingboro as a 14, Willingboro has to play Seneca. Overbrook as a 16, they have to play West Deptford. There's a possibility that, if Willingboro doesn't take care of business and Overbrook does, they could jump them. And then you're looking at going from potentially playing the number 1 seed and now playing the number 2 seed. And, there's not that great of a difference, but ultimately I think you would rather not play the top seed if you had an opportunity to kind of dictate that. So South Jersey's kind of loaded with a lot of games that, will dictate division championships, and at the same time will dictate where those 13, 14, 15, 16 seeded teams right now ultimately end up being.
And Donovan, do you have an impactful game that you're looking at when it comes to the public school playoff seeding?
Yeah, I'm looking at a few. In North Group 1, I'm looking at Hawthorne versus Pompton Lakes on Saturday afternoon. This is pretty much a win. It's looking like a win and you're in scenario for either team. Pompton Lakes is in a little bit more of a precarious situation. They're currently slotted into the 19th spot in North Group 1, and Hawthorne is right on the edge there at 17. And when you look at the teams ahead of Hawthorne in the standings, Boonton is 15th, and they're in a tough situation because they're going to play Cedar Grove this week at 3. And assuming Boonton loses that game, they might be bumped out of a playoff spot. Verona is playing Shabazz this week, and kind of the same thing as Boonton. Going to assume they're probably going to lose that game, with all due respect to both programs, and then they're going to bump out. So with a win, can Hawthorne jump into the standings there? And then same thing with Pompton Lakes. Can they go from 19 to one of the 14, 15, or 16 spots? Because Brearley at number 18 ahead of them, and that's the other game I'm looking at. Brearley's playing Dayton, and Dayton, this is a game for Brearley where this is a must-win game for Dayton because it's the 16th seed in North 2, and they're trying to reach the playoffs for the first time since 2012, and that might not even be enough, since the team that's behind them, Vernon, in number 17, is going to be playing West Milford this weekend. So really looking at that Brearley-Dayton game, because Brearley needs a win to kind of stay in the conversation. Dayton needs a win to get in, and then Hawthorne or Pompton Lakes in North Group 1 really need a win to jump into a playoff spot.
All right, guys, that brings us to our final preview of this upcoming week, and it's that old-fashioned rivalry between two Catholic schools in Bergen County. Number 3 St. Joe's taking on number 2 Bergen Catholic. It was an absolute classic last year in the state semifinals. St. Joe's was leading by a couple of scores. Bergen Catholic rallied late, eventually won in overtime to punch their ticket to the Meadowlands, where they eventually won their fourth consecutive state championship. Donovan, you have St. Joe's, a team that showed so much, even getting guys back healthy into the lineup and not having their full complement of players. They looked like they were destined to beat Don Bosco Prep. That did not happen. This is a chance for St. Joe's to orchestrate a statement victory and maybe throw a little chaos into the non-public A playoff seeding race. What do you see on the horizon in this game for St. Joe's, and what must they do to pull the upset and defeat Bergen Catholic, a team they have not beaten in quite some time, in this rivalry game?
I think this is as close to a must-win situation for Joe's as much as possible. And I know Ryan's going to talk about Bergen in a second, but from Joe's point of view, you lose to Peters 3 weeks ago, and then as you talked about, Dan, they looked like they were destined to beat Bosco. They come up just short in overtime, and then last week versus Pope John, that game gets forfeited for a win for them. So they haven't hit the field in 2 weeks, and now you're looking at a 3-game in 4 week scenario of Peters, Bosco, and Bergen, with losses already to Peters and Bosco. And the seeding here is big because a loss to Bergen here bumps them down to 5-3, and in this situation, does Joe's potentially move into the 5 seed in non-public A. So, and then they possibly have to face a Bosco or a Bergen in the state semifinals. So yeah, I mean, this is a huge game for Joe's. I think they proved a lot of, well, for me, I think Mason Geis really, really showed his talent in that game against Bosco a few weeks ago. And I think this game is going to be on him as well, that he's going to have to play as clean of a game as possible against the Bergen Catholic defense that can really wreak havoc against opposing quarterbacks. And we saw it a couple weeks ago when Bosco beat Bergen, where Carson Shane didn't light up the scoreboard, but he did just enough and he didn't turn the ball over in order for them to win the game. The run game got busy for Bosco in that game. Can Joe's kind of have a similar script in this game going forward, with Mason Geis playing a clean game, that defense kind of keeping Bergen off the scoreboard, and then also controlling the clock, right? Controlling the clock. Like there were some miscues in that category against Bosco a few weeks ago. I know that there were some miscues in that category against Bergen last year in the semifinals. So can Joe's can they control the clock? Can they play a clean game? And then, like you said, can they kind of throw something in there with the seeding for non-public A with a win?
And Ryan, as Donovan was alluding to with the seeding, as I'm kind of looking at it, if Bergen Catholic wins this game, they're probably going to lock up a top 2 seed for the upcoming non-public A playoffs. And if Bosco were to win out, you'd have to think Bosco is going to be the 1, BC the 2. This is what makes this game so important for the Crusaders, because quite frankly, they might have things line up a little easier for them to potentially get back to MetLife Stadium than it was even last year when they were a 1 seed and they had to have St. Joe's come into Oradell in the semifinals. Bergen Catholic, in one scenario, you could have the number 2 seed and maybe have a matchup with Adele Barton in the opening round, and then maybe have St. Peter's Prep waiting for you in Oradell in the semifinals. But that's all based on a win here. And for BC, after losing to Don Bosco, the luster came off. The number 1 ranking, the 28 wins in a row in New Jersey. It's almost like people have fallen asleep on Bergen Catholic because they had a bye. They had lopsided wins against Paramus Catholic and Del Barton. Now it's really where it matters the most. What can you do against an arch rival? It's very interesting what's on the horizon. So much on the line here for the Crusaders, as much as it is also for St. Joe's.
Yeah, you mentioned the seeding. Like if St. Joe's Met loses to Donovan Catholic, I think you throw in a St. Augustine and all of a sudden you put Augustine at 4. Like, to me, if Joe's loses this game, they have to go on the road. You got to put them on the road. I don't know if you could drop them to 6, but you have to put them on the road, at least as the 5 seed in non-public A. And like I said, if Donovan Catholic picks off St. Joe's Met, then all of a sudden you move Augustine to the 4. You know what I mean? Like, Joe's has to go on the road. But, for Bergen to win this game, their identity is always going to be running the ball, right? And I think Joe's is going to game plan to stop the run like they did against Bosco. But I think Bergen can find success throwing the ball in this game. And a lot of that has to do with the play of Trey Tagliaferri, who's just on a roll right now. I mean, he's kicked his game to another level. He had 4 touchdown throws last week against Del Barton, 14 of 20 passing, 17 touchdowns to 1 interception. That ratio is very impressive this year. He's completing over 65% of his passes. And he's doing this all as a sophomore. Like Coach Vito told me a few weeks ago when talking about Carson Shane, if you're starting as a sophomore, you're doing something right in this league. And look at his guy. I mean, Trey is having one heck of a season. And against the competition they play week in and week out, I can't tell you how amazing those numbers are. So they have three receivers. They've got the three juniors there: Brian Porter, Austin Busso, Anthony Willis. Junior Jamel Hammer, he's also a pass catcher for them. He's more of like a wide receiver, a tight end. So maybe, they chip, with that defensive line of Joe's. That defensive line is really good. That whole front seven's very good. And that's going to be the key there, for the passing game. Can they protect Tagliaferri well enough? That's a very experienced Bergen offensive line. But that St. Joe's front seven, if it's not Bosco having the best front seven, it's them. I mean, the Gray brothers, Cam Aim had a big game last week. Like there's a lot of guys in that front seven to deal with. So if Bergen can, hold those guys off, that could open things up for the passing game. I think they're going to try to finish them off in the second half with the run like they always do. But to me, it's building that lead, and it might be building it with a passing game. I think Trey Tagliaferri is going to have a good game in this one.
Incredible numbers, like you said, for the sophomore signal caller at Bergen Catholic, putting up record numbers for a sophomore in BC football history. And again, so much on the line. These two teams could very well meet again when it comes postseason time, but based on the result of this game, we'll decide whether or not that's going to be early or later when it comes time for the postseason. So very interesting matchup, obviously, when these rivals collide, and that's going to be the case on Saturday afternoon in Oradell. So that will end a marathon episode here of the Jersey Blitz. And a reminder, fans, that from the opening kickoff to the end of the season, NJ.com's award-winning staff of reporters and photojournalists put you in the middle of the football action. For in-depth coverage of all these games around New Jersey, including photo galleries, recaps, and stats, be sure to visit NJ.com/HSSports. And a reminder to join us, if you can't make it out in person, to watch our NJ.com football games of the week. This Friday, the NJIC Championship game featuring Butler and Rutherford in a battle of the unbeatens. Kickoff is going to be at 6 p.m. And then on Saturday, a good old-fashioned showdown between two of the top teams of the Big Central Conference. Woodbridge, with one loss on the season, taking on undefeated St. Joe's Metuchen. Kickoff is slated for 1 p.m. in Metuchen. And you could watch those games live and then anytime on demand as NJ.com subscribers. So that'll do it for another edition of the Jersey Blitz. I'd like to thank Ryan Patty, Donovan Hugel, Kevin Minnick, Mike Kinney, and Joe Zadalis, and our guest producer here, Luis Torres, here for helping us out on this week's episode. And join us next week as we're going to be breaking down all the brackets that are going to be released later on for the public school ranks as we get started for the postseason in the 2025 New Jersey football year. So for all the guys, I'm Dan Long saying so long. We'll see you next week here on the Jersey Blitz.